The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty Man.
Well, hello, one and all. Hello, family. Greetings to all of you who are followers of the book, The Language of the Heart. If you've never been, welcome to the show. These are Bill W.'s Grapevine writings from 1944 to 1970, and we've been going through this incredible book with our good friend Chris S. And we are making the approach to the landing strip.
We're closing in on it, Monty. We're closing in.
We are. What are we doing this week, buddy?
We are doing, we're going to be on page 384. This is the last section of this particular book, and it concerns the Grapevine, as an entity. And this article that we're going to read tonight is July 1945, and it's entitled "The Grapevine: Past, Present, and Future." So 1945, it probably hadn't been being published all that long. It's early on in the writings, and Bill was heavily involved with it, I think, because it was coming out of New York. So he had his hand in it all. So let's see what he has to say. He's gonna talk about past, present, and future with the Grapevine. Let's see what he has to say. The Grapevine has just completed the first year of its existence. Scores of enthusiastic letters are coming in. They are written from all parts of the United States and some foreign countries. They congratulate the Grapevine staff and ask them to keep up their good work. To these felicitations, I'd like to add my own. A grand job has been done by the volunteer staff, who gave freely a vast amount of time and labor. And some gave money, too. You don't start a paper on hay. To the retiring volunteers, I want to say, along with every Grapevine subscriber, congratulations and thanks. How did the Grapevine start, and where does it go from here? Last summer, several New York AAs decided that it was about time the groups in our metropolitan area had a monthly publication. At first, there was some discussion about getting it suitably endorsed by the local groups, the Alcoholic Foundation, or somebody, but no one could endorse a magazine that hadn't yet appeared. The Grapeviners went ahead anyway, on the theory that if their sheet was good enough, it would take on. If it proved too corny or dull, it would flop automatically and quickly. People could, the Grapevine said, take it or leave it alone. In a burst of local pride, the Grapevine staff mailed the first printing to all the groups in the United States. No pressure soliciting. They just mailed it. Subscriptions began to filter in from everywhere. No longer a trickle, they are today a stream. The Grapevine now has a subscriber in every one of the 48 states and even abroad. Foreseeing a broader activity, members of the Grapevine staff were good enough to ask me a few months ago if I would take an interest in the venture for the coming year. They told me they thought the magazine might be enlarged to national dimensions, that ultimately it should be incorporated and finally, perhaps, hooked up with the Alcoholic Foundation, which, as nearly every AA knows, is the sponsor of our central office and all our national undertakings. So this is funny. Somebody just started to do it, Monty. How should we get it approved? Some people just got together, formed a committee, and started it. And I guess it seems like Bill was okay with that. This conversation made it abundantly plain that while rotating squads of volunteers might always continue to procure and edit pieces for the Grapevine and participate in setting its policy, there could be no doubt that continuous paid help and enlarged working facilities would soon be necessary. They asked if I would help with these arrangements and perhaps contribute a piece occasionally. These things, health permitting, I agreed to do. He did a lot of them. We're on like nearly page 400 of them, Monty.
Yeah.
So health permitting. Besides the volunteer staff, we now boast one part-time paid secretarial worker to help handle details. This work, however, continues to mount, as does the volume of potential editorial content. More paid help will probably become necessary, and the size of the magazine may have to be expanded, all of which would require a slight increase in the subscription rate. The Grapevine is self-supporting now and should be kept that way always, rather than dependent on subsidies or gratuities to ensure its continuity, quality, and service. So I'm not really sure, Monty, that it's self-supporting at this point in time. I think it loses money. I could be wrong. Someone could correct me. But I think for quite a long time, it's cost more to produce than it gets. But people believe it's necessary. I came to a conclusion the other day, Monty, about the Grapevine, and it's the same conclusion I come to in the stories in the back of the book, and it's the same conclusion I come to with all of our pamphlets. They're for people who haven't gotten here yet. Does that make any sense? Like when I read a pamphlet today with all my experience, I'm like, is AA for you? You know what I mean? Pamphlets like that. And I'm part of a big book meeting where somebody always wants to read a story once a month, just as part of our big book study. And I'm like, I don't really need a story right now. I'm in. The stories disclose in numerous ways, what we're like, what happened, and what we're like today, which is always a good message.
Sure.
But I think it's a stronger message to someone who's maybe becoming convinced or needs to become convinced.
Yeah, and two, like with the stories in the back. I mean, in the beginning of the big book, it suggests that you go and read the stories in the back, right? And, so to see if you can identify with any of that. When people say, well, I get my sponsor, you read the first 165 pages. Well, but if they're actually reading that, they're going to stop and go back and read the stories. I mean, because we want, and that's what I do with guys, if I'm working with somebody new, which I seldom work with somebody brand new anymore, but if I am, I want them to highlight where they identify with these, especially in Bill's story. Do you identify with any of this? Because if you've highlighted more than 4 or 5 pieces, you probably could use this.
Yeah, important warning sign. Yeah, I identify with all the stories in the back of the book.
Right. But you're right. I think I'm not a big fan of personal story meetings being part of the big book study. I mean, big book I could go on and on about that, and I don't want to do that, but big book studies have become big book shares, and they're not really studies for the most part, right? When you study something, you study it for what it says. You don't read a paragraph and then share about your day.
Yeah. That's really wrong. And I think, and today the Grapevine. You were saying last week that the Grapevine doesn't show up at very many meetings anymore.
Right.
Like,
It doesn't.
35 years ago, it was on every table with the rest of the literature. I never see it anymore, and I think it's pointed more toward institutions. I think people
Yeah,
mail copies to jails and places where someone would have the ability to read
that's
it
good.
and identify it. And I use it as an identification tool.
I used to early on. I used to look at the Grapevine. I don't know how it is now, but more like AA's answer to uh, uh, Reader's Digest. I mean, because it stories. It had a humor section, right? There were
Yeah,
jokes that were surrounded around alcoholism and drunks and things, cartoons, uh, and then news, about the fellowship, and it was
yeah.
kind of like a miniature Reader's Digest for AA. Later on, though, and it's been a while since I've actually read a copy of the thing. Later on, though, it seemed to have changed. It wasn't something that I'd stick on the back of my toilet to read. You know what I mean? It just wasn't that interesting anymore.
I've
And
never
I got to
once, I've never once walked into a meeting where somebody said, "Hey, the new Grapevine's here." Never
right.
once. Never
But
once.
I have to tell you though, after going through this book, I've been tempted to maybe pick a few up and start reading them again. I'm just curious.
Yeah, we might as well know a little bit about what we're talking about.
Right?
I mean, we don't want to do anything different, too different, but but
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, it says through though the grapevine is young, it is commencing to have its own tradition. Every member of the staff aspires to make the paper a true voice of AA. All of us who are very sensitive to the thought that it ought never be sectional in its appeal, nor should it take sides on any controversial question. While it must constantly talk of people in its news and views, it ought never to glorify or belittle anyone, nor lend itself to a commercial undertaking, nor become a mere mouthpiece for any of us, even the central office of the Alcoholic Foundation. Of course, everybody will see pieces in the grapevine now and then with which he or she will not agree. So it must always be understood that those pieces reflect the thoughts and feelings of their authors, but not necessarily those of the grapevine. To crystallize these traditions and principles, we ask for once more contributions from all parts of the country. Meanwhile, please don't expect too much of us too quickly. We are still understaffed. We can't possibly answer all of your letters and inquiries. I'm afraid that that will have to go for me too. I shall be unable to engage in personal correspondence. I can only write a piece to all of you more now and then. If agreeable to the subscribers, I would like to discuss in coming issues such topics as anonymity, leadership, public relations, the use of money in AA, and the like. Upon matters such as these, our traditions and practices is by no means well settled. Like most older AAs, I have correct principles once given sufficient experience. The purpose, therefore, of the forthcoming pieces will be to present the current thought of the pros and cons on these moot questions. These articles will be suggestive only. Their object will be to promote further discussion rather than to announce any new principle. That really is that's really good of him to basically say that. It's basically we're not. None of this speaks for everybody. None of this is definitive. It's just personal experience.
Yeah, yeah.
And
This is not the big book, for instance.
right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. In no way is it the big book. Um, we of the Grapevine once more affirm that this is your periodical. It will be the vehicle for your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and your aspirations, if you care to make it that. While we can only publish a fraction of the material which will come to hand, you may be sure that we shall do our fairest and best in making the selections. Always wishing to reflect AA and nothing but AA. It will be the ideal of the Grapevine, always to serve, never to dictate or command. Please help us make it a true voice. That might be, one of the first articles he wrote about the Grapevine. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I was just thinking, I remember attending a meeting years ago where they would use stories in the Grapevine as topics. And I remember somebody getting a little irritated at that because it was almost like this was gospel. This was the big book. This was how you work a step. No, this was some guy's personal story on how he screwed it up is what it was. You know what I mean? So yeah, we got to be. So I got a question for you. I made a statement the other day, and I don't know if I'm correct on this, and I may have to retract it. But then I heard KDP almost say the same thing, and I thought, I got to ask Chris. And this kind of reflects what we're reading here too. So the first part of this question is the Grapevine, let's not go in the definition of conference-approved literature yet, but is the Grapevine considered AA conference-approved literature?
This is what was explained to me. In this article that we just read, somebody just started to do it. There wasn't any approval, right? So he explains that, at least in the beginning, it started without an approval. I heard, through some service guy that you can't conference approve the Grapevine material because it's a monthly publication and it takes sometimes years to get something conference approved. So the conference approval is for its existence. The conference has approved it as a periodical, not what's in it,
not its content. Okay.
So if you want to be one of those tradition sharks or whatever, and you're only going to allow conference approved literature in your meeting, you can't read from the Grapevine because there's nobody that's approved that story through the conference or whatever's being written in it.
Right. Yeah.
But again, AA is AA. We get used to some things and we don't pick a fight with it.
Okay, so here's the other part of my question. I made this statement on a show last week that conference-approved literature simply means that literature is approved for conferences. It doesn't mean that's the only literature that you can read in a meeting. Am I correct in that, or am I not?
So the conference that they're talking about, they're not talking about this is approved for conferences. The conference body of Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a publication department, and there's certain criteria that has to be met for approval. For they had to go through that for the 12 and 12, and they probably had to go through it for this book, The Language of the Heart. So all that basically says is that they've approved it. They don't not approve. They don't say you can't read anything but conference approved. They say that this is conference approved. So there's no law coming from Alcoholics Anonymous saying you can't read from outside literature. The groups that are autonomous and have a group conscience and maybe have a charter or whatever can make that part of the group's bylaws. Not reading anything that's not conference approved literature, and maybe sometimes having guardrails like that isn't a bad idea, but the conference doesn't tell you what to read and what not to read. It just says, we've gone through this. We've had editors. Many people have proofed it. We agree with the material in it, and it can go to Works Publishing to be published. You know what I mean?
Because I think there's a lot of people that think unless it's conference approved, AA as a whole doesn't want you reading it in a meeting. I think a lot of people think that. because they've been taught that. And I've always been, I don't think that's the case. I think it was exactly what you're talking about. Although I am mistaken, I thought because it was conference approved literature, it was approved for conferences. So I got to retract that. But yeah, if a group conscience says we're going to read from Daily Reflections, it's fine. It doesn't have to be conference approved.
Yeah, I mean, Daily Reflections was certainly conference approved. Here's it's funny when you're talking about Al-Anon. Here's a funny statistic or whatever. The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions are conference approved for Al-Anon. The Big Book is not. So there are groups in Al-Anon that can read from the traditions in the 12 and 12. They can even read from the steps in the 12 and 12. But if you pull out a big book, you can get your butt handed to you.
And Al-Anon. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
Yeah, that's another thing listen, I've heard a lot of things from service people, and I call it like oral tradition or whatever. Doesn't mean I can't make a mistake with some of these facts. I haven't been one of those guys that went to every conference, and I've been a delegate for and chaired every kind of. I'm not that service guy, so there are people who may have a better understanding of a lot of this than I do.
Yeah. Okay. But well, thank you.
I've paid attention over the years, and I've heard some things that just sounded true. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, Monty, this next article, it's called "What Is Our Grapevine?" and this was written a year later. This was written in December of '46. So let's see what kind of changes took place over the year and a half between the last article and this one.
All righty.
Hundreds of AAs have not yet seen or heard of the Grapevine. Others query, who is it? What is it? What are its ideals? So I have been asked to explain. The Grapevine is our principal monthly journal. It is devoted to the interests of Alcoholics Anonymous and to nothing else. It tries to publish the news and portray the views of AAs everywhere. It aims to reflect a cross-section of our thought and action, already reaching all parts of America. It is beginning to be read in foreign lands. Some of its 5,600 subscribers are non-alcoholics vitally interested in our program and philosophy. In short, the Grapevine is rapidly becoming the collective voice of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like everything else that is good, the Grapevine has been an evolution, not a promotion. Like Topsy, it just grew. I guess Topsy was a movie or something in 1946 that we're supposed to know about. Now let me cut back to our past to let you see more of why and how the Grapevine came to be. 10 years ago, our fellowship was a weak and wobbly infant. Just a few alcoholics clinging desperately to an ideal and to each other. These early ones were the originators of the Alcoholics Anonymous movement. As our numbers swelled, the newer members naturally looked to the older ones for help and example. They began to call us older ones leaders. And in the case of Dr. Bob and myself, they coined for each of us the rather resounding title of founder. Since AA really had a score of founders, he and I really wish that hadn't occurred. But it did. Simply, we suppose, because we were the first in point of time and were therefore of the longest experience. Thus it happened, and we came to have in the minds of our fellow AAs a rather unique status. Never official, always informal, yet there it was. In matters of principles or policies, AAs began to regard Bob and me as representing their collective conscience. They also began to think of us as a sort of heart to the movement, which took in the constant stream of incoming problems and perplexities and then pumped out answers. Then, as we went about among the growing groups, he and I were asked to stand on platforms and expound AA to ever larger audiences. So it was that we became the collective voice of AA. As a friend put it, that was a whale of a big order. Bob and I agree with him. it's too big an assignment for any two alcoholics. We're too fallible. We were, and were we infallible, we couldn't last forever anyhow. Hence, he and I have been for a long time now in the process of passing these functions of conscious, heart, and voice over to others. Years ago, we helped set up the Alcoholic Foundation, whose trustees became guardians of your general AA funds, and who of late, by custom and general consent, are more and more regarded as the custodians of AA tradition and general policy. The trustees are no body of authority. They simply act as a sort of general service committee to all AA. Primarily, they are custodians and mediators. As such, they are beginning to be seen by the groups as representing our collective AA conscience. Bob and I hope that trend will continue. This seems likely as the trustees and their duties are becoming better understood. I'm going to take exception to that paragraph, Monty. I don't believe Bill's ideal vision of the board of directors of Alcoholics Anonymous has maintained the sanctity of Bill's vision.
Yeah.
I think more and more they've taken actions, outside the scope of the informal process of having groups decide and individuals decide and areas and districts decide. I've just seen too many decisions made by Alcoholics Anonymous that lie outside of what you would call a group conscience.
Right. Yep. Me too.
But, it's 70, 80 years later. Anyway, a year after the creation of the Alcoholic Foundation, the book Alcoholics Anonymous was published in April 1939. This, too, was the enterprise of a group of AA members who thought our experience ought to be codified and set on paper. The group supplied funds, suggestions, and stories. Bob and I were given the task of deciding what should go into the book, and I was assigned the writing of its text. The publication of the AA book marked the point of our history where our early members, along with Bob and myself, transferred our experience through this new medium to an ever wider circle, which now promises to be the wide world of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's talking about the big book there. Bob and I were given the task of deciding what should go into the book. That's really inaccurate. Hank Parkhurst and Bill decided what was supposed to go into the book with a little help from Fitz Mayo. And that's really what's been discovered by Shaberg in the writing of the big book. Much to the consternation of our Akron friends, Akron had nothing to do with the big book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think Dr. Bob's Nightmare, might be the exception. I'm not even sure the stories were really written by the people in Akron. When you do anybody that's like pulling their hair out right now, I would suggest that you read the writing of the big book by an established critical historian and great member, in recovery, William Shaberg, called The Writing of the Big Book. I highly recommend that be written read if you're startled or want to contradict this.
Do you so am I hearing you say that you're not even sure if those who were credited of writing the stories actually were the people that wrote them?
Yeah, I mean, what Shaberg picked up in the writing of the big book was he found evidence that a writer was sent to Akron to take these members out for lunch and have them talk to them about their experience, and he would go back to his hotel and he would write their stories.
Why am I not surprised?
It sounds startling, right? But you got to understand, so many people were really suspicious of New York, and why are we sending money to New York, and what's Bill up to now, and what the heck is he doing now? And there was distrust between Akron, Cleveland, and New York. There just was. There still is. You know what I mean? There still is.
Yeah. So I was my co-host Roger McDermott and I were talking. I told him, I said, and I want him to, I hope he listens to this episode because he has some questions. I said, from what I can from what I can see within the depths of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's two camps. There's the Bill Wilson camp and there's the Clarence Snyder camp. And he goes, where is that in any of the literature? And I said, well, you got to kind of look at the history. You got to kind of dig in it. But it seems, from what I can gather, that's kind of the case, because these guys didn't always get along really well, and they kind of had different ways of doing things, and it stood out pretty strong. And am I right on this, Chris? Or
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's things that if you've been inspired by things that came out of Akron and Cleveland, you have a certain belief system and operational methodology within Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you've come out of the New York area, you have a different one. That's an overgeneralization. But you can recognize it if you travel around to a lot of. Listen, I've been to meetings in 46 states. I've been to meetings, and 6 countries. So I've got some experience with different areas, and you can kind of feel that. You can kind of feel where the influence came from in an AA group, whether it was a New York influence or an Akron, Cleveland influence. Now in sponsorship, the same thing is true. You can find people who've been influenced from the Southern California Pacific Group-esque thing, and you can find people that are inspired by the Denver Young People's Group York Street Clubhouse genesis, and those are perspectives on sponsorship and recovery that you can recognize the difference right away. I'll generalize it like this: if you're coming out of Southern California, you're going to have an emphasis on home group and sponsorship authority. If you're coming out of the Denver area, you're going to have an emphasis on Alcoholics Anonymous loyalty and God authority. You understand what I'm saying? And that's an oversimplification, but you can recognize those trends and those attitudes.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. The AA Central Office at New York came into being simultaneously with the book. Here, our staff nowadays answers thousands of inquiries, looks after our overall public relations, writes letters of encouragement to new and isolated groups, sees the printing and distribution of group lists, pamphlets, literature, and the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Several years ago, the trustees of our foundation acquired full ownership of the AA book, and at the same time assumed the custodial oversight of the central office, whose financial support has gradually been taken over by the groups through their voluntary contributions to the foundation. Thousands of new members have found their way to AA, hundreds of groups have been helped with their growing pains, and millions of people have heard of AA through the functioning of the central office. Little by little, our central office is becoming recognized as the heart of AA. And that, of course, is in New York. It receives inquiries and problems, then pumps out information and the best answers it can. Thus, one more function of the originators of AA is in process of transfer to the central office staff. The central office has almost become the central heart of AA. Now you say, what has all this got to do with the Grapevine? Just this. Like the earlier groups which assembled the foundation, the AA book, and the central office, the Grapevine began 2 years ago among several newspaper-minded AAs who thought we needed a monthly periodical. They were willing to contribute a little money and a boundless effort to make it a success. At the beginning, this group of AAs had no special authorization from anyone. There's your conference approval.
Right.
They merely took off their their coats and did a job so well done that at the end of a year, they found their paper in national distribution. There was no sponsoring, no promoting. Like the AA book, the central office, and the foundation, the Grapevine became a national institution on its own effort and merit. Arrived at this point, members of the staff came to the trustees to discuss the future of the publication. They also asked me to write some pieces and requested me to ascertain if the groups would like to have this periodical as their principal AA publication. Hundreds of groups and individual subscribers came back with an enthusiastic yes. There was scarce a single dissent. Accordingly, the Grapevine was incorporated, its beneficial ownership transferred to the foundation, and it is now being managed by a joint committee composed of 2 trustees of the foundation, 2 members of the volunteer staff, and its editor. Not quite self-supporting yet, we hope it will presently become so. Consequently, we are witnessing still another transference. The Grapevine is becoming the voice of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, it wasn't quite self-supporting in 1946. So, I'm part of a business today that has an entity that loses money. But this entity is so important to the organization as a whole. It's been seen as such a bright and shining star that the rest of the organization, at least up until this point in time, have been willing to support it with the funds that the other pieces of the business make. Now, if you were an absolute strict businessman, you would have gotten rid of this piece of business. Mm-hmm. But there are feelings within, within the board of this organization that this is a flagship. This is a bright and shining star. Let's figure it out. Let's figure out how to support it. And that's probably exactly what happened here with this Grapevine over the years.
Makes sense.
As one of the staff members recently put it, we think that the Grapevine ought to become the voice of Alcoholics Anonymous, bringing us news of each other across great distances and always describing what can be freshly seen in that vast and life-giving pool we call AA experience. Never taking part in the controversial issues of religion, reform, or politics, never seeking profit, never lending itself to the commerce or propaganda, always mindful of our sole aim to carry the AA message to those who suffer alcoholism. Such is our idea for the Grapevine. Monty, about 30 years ago in the Grapevine, I think I've got this right, it had the gray pages. Do you remember the gray pages? The gray pages were about scientific research on alcoholism.
Okay.
They had information that was coming from other areas outside of Alcoholics Anonymous about alcoholics and alcoholism.
Yeah.
And as the Grapevine editor that I sponsored told me, there was always friction about this. A lot of people wanted the gray pages. A lot of people wanted them out. They got them out. They got them back in. And it was like a back and forth. I haven't seen a Grapevine in years, so I don't know if they still have it. But they even wanted to put information in on statistics and scientific studies and things like that where it related to alcoholism. I don't see a problem with doing that myself, but if you're like a strict AA and you don't care about what those scientists do, you'd probably have a problem with the gray pages.
Well, but if you kind of look at the attitude in the doctor's opinion, you would almost you would welcome it, right?
There is that. We've always welcomed the opinion of the medical fraternity, as Bill would say. So anyway.
And it's in the front of the big books, not in the back.
He starts off with it, and because I think the doctor's opinion is a legitimacy statement. Hey, everybody, we're legitimate. We've got the staff psychiatrist at one of the biggest hospitals treating alcoholism and drug addiction telling us we're good. Pay attention. I'd put it in the front of the book too.
Yeah, I hear I hear you.
All right. With these sentiments, Dr. Bob and I heartily concur. We hope that AAs everywhere will feel it to be their newspaper, that our able AA writers will continue to contribute freely, that all groups will send in news of their doings which may be of general interest, and that the Grapevine will presently take its place in the minds of all AAs as one of our essential central services, close alongside the foundation, the AA book, and the central office, close to those. Now, here's another thing for anybody out there. There's a certain fee that you can pay, and you can have the archive of every Grapevine that's ever existed.
Yeah.
You know, you've probably seen that. You know, I
Yep.
think there's a charge for it, but you could get the June 1951 issue if you so choose. I don't know how many people are going through these, but you know, just for historical archival purposes,
Maybe
you know,
they're all stored in a cave somewhere,
yeah,
right?
limestone cave.
Right? There you go.
That's where they should be. Oh man.
Oh my goodness sakes.
You see, dear fellow members, Dr. Bob and I have a slightly ulterior motive. For when the transfer of our original functions of conscience, heart, and voice is made complete to these newer, better, and more permanent agencies, then we old-timers can really take a walk. You know, we can retire. So in 1945, he's already thinking about passing on a lot. It must be a lot of work by 1945.
Right.
So by 1950, you know, he's deciding on traditions, and 1955, he's deciding on, you know, AA comes of age. You know, we're giving AA to the people, and he's getting the hell out, Monty. Is what he's doing.
Yeah,
But I don't think he ever really does. I think he had that office in New York until, you know, a month before he died or something.
Wow. This is great stuff, man. It's such rich history, and I love the controversy in some of it.
Yeah.
I'm really I really love the piece about maybe some of the people that wrote the stories in the back didn't write the stories in the back. I like that kind of thing. And if people's hair are standing on end, good. It's good for you.
You know, it makes a lot of sense. Like there's like 20 stories from Akron or something like that in the first edition, 18, something like that.
Yeah.
Can you imagine getting those knuckleheads all to sit down and write their story?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Practical.
No, that never happened. Try doing it at your home group. You know, raise your hand. Tell everybody you want 15. You want 5,000 words by Monday on their story, and see how many people you would get do that. Yeah. So yeah, they had to get a writer, an editor, and they had to coerce them into, you know, going out there. It makes all the sense in the world. It's not part of our our conference approved tradition to know this stuff. It takes a critical historical legitimate historian to dig this stuff up.
Yeah. I think we ought to have a committee in New York called Conference Approved T-shirts. Oh my goodness sakes! All right, good stuff. Hey, listen, I want to give a shout out to Paul H. Legacies Recovery Recordings. He's our newest member of the Take 12 Recovery network of podcasters. Please go to our website at take12radio.com and click on the big purple banner that says Podcasting Network, and you'll find Paul's talks. He's got some great folks on there. KDP, you don't want to miss out on her. I'm going to try and get her on one of our shows here coming up. But yeah, please check out Paul. He's doing a great job. This guy is humble and just a gentle heart. Paul H. with 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. You can type that in YouTube too, and you can find his website as well. And you're doing work with him too, right, Chris?
Yeah, you know, we decided to do a short workshop, so like 10 or 11 podcasts on an adequate presentation of the steps. Now there's big book studies galore. You know, we've all done them.
Yeah.
the focus of this one is, let's just say you've already gone through the steps. You've gotten experience with the steps. These are just some tips and tools and some ideas about how best to present that, how best to take somebody else through the steps. Because really, ultimately, what our whole purpose is to be good sponsors.
Yes.
Good guides to recovery. That's really ultimately what we all want to be. So, so this workshop is focused on that. When you get to this step, these are the things that you're going to need to communicate.
Yeah.
These are some of the tools we've used, and some of the tricks of the trade that we've found that have worked as far as carrying this message, encouraging somebody to go through the work and then carry the message themselves.
That's great. That's great stuff. Because in the chapter working with others, it doesn't always cover some of the stuff that we're dealing with today when it comes with working with people, right?
Working with others was written when there were two groups.
Yeah.
And so the focus was really on finding the alcoholics.
Yeah.
So
right.
I'll say this: the amount of time anybody out there, let's say there's some people out there that are real big, 12-step fellowship members. The amount of time you spend going to meetings every week is the same amount of time the early AAs used to search around town for an alcoholic to help. And so that's the perspective of the chapter working with others. And once you've found one, here's what you do with them.
Yeah.
Which is still pertinent today.
Yeah. Yeah, you bet. All right. Chris, thank you again. We will see you next week. We may land this plane next week.
I'm thinking, what's the show number? What's the number of this show, Monty? 98?
98, I believe. Yeah.
It's 2 more weeks.
Okay. We're gonna
land on 100, buddy.
We're gonna land on 100. Yeah, that'll be good. Cool.
I don't want to land on 99,
No,
Monty.
we can't do that.
It'll be 2 very short articles, and you and I'll just blither on like crazy for the rest of the show. Okay, the last show will be 2 very short articles.
All right. Yeah. What fun. All right. Thank you for joining us, listeners. Make sure you download this. You can share this download for fun and for free. Make copies, do whatever you want. Just make sure that you never share any of our stuff for financial gain. We don't, and we ask that you don't as well. But feel free to copy and share. We want to help as many people as possible.
Do not sell this on eBay.
No.
That's very bad karma.
Yeah, not good. All right. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty Man along with Chris S. and the rest of the Take 12 Recovery Radio family, and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty Man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
This has been a Chicken and a Pig production.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.